Hi everyone, welcome. I'm preparing to check in on some of my European night crawlers, and it's interesting when you look around here, this entire shelf space and the floor with the buckets seems to be dominated by European night crawlers, which I abbreviate as ENC. So like even down here, these yellow buckets you could see have ENCs living in them. This mixed bin of red worms evidently has some European night crawlers mixed in there too. I've even got like a little bit of a baiting situation going over here, trying to round up straggler worms from when I harvested the previous batch of European night crawlers. Well, I harvested their castings, which are now in here. I'm just trying to round up the last of the European night crawlers that were left behind when I launched the yellow buckets. But the European night crawlers that we're checking in on today are the ones that are in these two tubs right here. And these little guys have been in these two bins for 246 days now. 12 days have passed since we gave them feeding 21, and I'm gearing up to give them feeding 22 today. And we got a little bit of an interesting test over here in bin number 1. In bin number 1, we've been running a compostable bag test. A compostable bag test that actually started when these worms lived in their previous home. So the bag came with them. The compostable bag now exceeds 408 days of active composting according to my records, and over 450 days since the actual test began, and I am questioning whether I want that test to continue. So I've got some food for these little guys. I'm going to get the systems up on the bench and we're going to get them fed. So let's get started. So now when these systems were up on the shelf, bin number 1 was on this side, but over here on the table, on the bench, I like to go from left to right from your point of view. So bin number 1 is right here, and bin number 1 is the one that has the compostable bag test in it. So I put this little container in here because we normally take the compostable bag out so as to not disturb it too much during our feeding, and set it aside so that we can be a little bit more rough in handling the contents of these containers as we feed. So the reason I wanted to remind myself of this was because last time too, I think I just started into the feeding a little bit oblivious to the fact that this was the system in which the compostable bag test is being conducted, and I was a little bit overly rough, I believe, with the compostable bag. So right from the get-go, we're going to attempt to extract the compostable bag from the system, get it out of our way, and hopefully that will enable us to proceed without damaging it too much. I mean, I could have sworn just now as I was running my fingers through the material that something sort of snapped or popped or broke or something, so I'm not sure if perhaps I removed a certain piece of this compostable bag accidentally, inadvertently, and if I did, then so be it. Alright, let's just drop it in here and set it aside, and we will return it to the system to let the test continue. But here you can sort of get a little sense of how the bag looks at this point after 400 plus days of composting action. And I've been sort of casually entertaining the idea in my videos of possibly bringing that test to an end. I wouldn't mind if there seemed to be sort of some indication that the end of the test might occur at some point in the near future, but it just seems like the thing goes on and on and on. It's like an unending process, kind of making me even question whether or not we would ever see any more significant progress on the breakdown of that bag. So, I think I'm just going to put it out there. Most of you probably know how I feel about it now if you've been watching my videos. I've been kind of indicating to you guys in my videos that I'm sort of losing interest in the test itself, and I'm not sure if any of you tend to agree, but one way or another, my idea was to definitely bring that test to an end at some point prior to these systems needing to be harvested and needing to haul the worms out. So One way or another, that bag will not be accompanying these worms into their new home when the time comes to bring these systems to an end. But I'm certainly not opposed to the idea of ending the test prior. Like I said, today we will be returning it to the feeding zone and letting the test continue. But at this point, I would like to sort of put the question out there to you guys as the viewers. What are your feelings about the test? Is it interesting enough to keep it going? Is it kind of something that we can liken to watching grass grow or watching ice melt? Is it worth having it in there and us going through the trouble of managing it as a test, or is it realistic to think that the thing's probably not going to go anywhere soon at this point, and that maybe removing it and calling off the test at this point before the bag gets fully composted? If that's a good idea, I'd love to hear what people think. So please leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts on the topic. I am definitely inclined to do so with or without the support of the viewers, but I do like the idea of tailoring what I'm doing here to the liking of the viewers and trying to keep everyone's interest in what I'm doing over here and keeping things interesting. So I've got a nice assortment over here of foods for these little guys. No coffee, so no coffee filters, but the 2 coffee filters that were serving the purpose of feeding zone indicator, that's what these things were doing out on the top, was showing us where we last fed. They're holding up great, so we're going to continue using them. So yeah, we've got a variety of different stuff like cucumber peels, cantaloupe, melon rind. There's a lemon here that I cut in half, and there's some other various odds and ends in here, which I'm not even sure if I can identify them all. I think there's some peach in here. So it's a pretty decent size feeding that they're getting today. As bedding, I've got a couple pieces of paper that I'd like to do away with. So let me just go grab them. They're right over here. They're just a couple sheets of newspaper that have been sitting around here. They might have been used as top covering somewhere. I don't even remember where or when. But it did seem like this would be the sort of material that the food would, so what was I trying to say? Like, it does seem like material that would probably go pretty quick. So by placing the foods in and on or around these pieces of paper, I assume that they're going to get pretty much gobbled up as the worms come by to take part in the feeding that we're giving them today. So I was going to lay this in as their somewhat meager portion of bedding to accompany their feeding. I mean, at the age of these systems, I'd really like to start driving the systems towards completion so that we can think about harvesting the castings and moving the worms on at some point soon. So I wouldn't want to use any sort of bedding such as leaves, which would come with a bunch of leaf stems. I mean, we can see evidence of leaves being used as bedding in here. So there are some leaf stems floating around in here. And if we were to put some fresh ones in, then they'd be in here forever. The ones that are in here, I guess, will just continue to, get worked down gradually by the worms. But I certainly wouldn't want to put anything in here that's going to take a great deal of time to break down, because I don't really feel like these systems have a great deal more amount of time remaining before we're probably going to come to the decision point of, bringing them to an end. So now here, I think some of what's in here is some potato that had been peeled after it was first boiled, making it really tough to break apart after it's been frozen, because it all sort of clumped together. So I guess it's all just going to go in here into bin number 1 as a little bit of a mound, and I think just to compensate for the offset here of extra stuff, we'll put remains over into bin number 2, and then that to me seems like we've divvied up today's portions pretty fairly. And as always, we attempt to position our little compostable bag test into a place where we would expect to see a good amount of worm traffic. So I generally try to position it on top of some of the freshly added yummy foods, ideally onto the most yummy of the foods, so that as the worms come to enjoy the food, they sort of inadvertently are presented with the compostable bag and hopefully help us work it down towards completion in their feeding frenzy, going for the yummy melon, hopefully also possibly taking a little nibble out of the compostable bag, or not. It's hard to say. It's hard to say whether anything's even happening over there at this point, so I am a little bit skeptical, as you can probably tell from the tone of my voice. So I'm just going to drop the old foods that we encountered here along the way in on top of the feeding. And, you know, I didn't put my grit out here, so I'm not prepared to apply grit, but the system that's been fed 20 plus times at this point has probably received multiple applications of grit, so I don't think that's all that important. I think to cover up, we're just gonna bring in material from the edges. And in a few of my systems, I've deliberately avoided messing with the outer edges of the bins, and I'm not sure if that was the approach we took last time. The material does feel a little bit compacted and firm, so it is quite possible that when we finished feeding last time, we might have just covered up without turning to the outer edges for material with which to cover up. So we're going to go ahead and not only bring in material with which we can cover up, but we're also going to take advantage of the opportunity to aerate the material. It is interesting to see how many worms are out there on the edges sometimes, considering that the feeding zones have been right down the middle for quite a while, or possibly during the entire life of these systems. They've always probably been fed down the middle. So it does seem like the worms come in for some fresh foods and then they just like to make their way to the outer edges and wander around. I mean, it is fair to believe that some material, some food, I mean, you know, from the feedings makes its way into those outer edges, especially when we're really aggressive with tilling the material in the bins around and moving stuff around. But just the little bit of inspection I did of the material as I brought it up to the surface and spun it around, I didn't really see a whole lot of stuff that would register in my mind as leftovers. So yeah, this might have been one of the systems where we skipped tilling up the outer edges because the stuff is quite dense down here in the hole. So I definitely believe that aerating has value. But it is interesting how the worms certainly are not put off by heading into this material, even though it is a little bit more dense than what was more recently tilled up and aerated near the middle of the bin. They certainly don't mind crawling into stuff that's a little bit more firm and possibly harder to crawl through. This was just a larger object I encountered along the way. It's a stem of a pumpkin, so I'm going to just position that right there in the middle on top of the feeding, and I think that pretty much brings us to the end of this check-in. I think before we put on the covers, though, I think I'm going to bring out my mosquito dunks solution, and even though I don't really see any evidence of flying insects here, I've been trying to make it a habit because one of my systems does have a little bit of a flying insect issue, so I'm doing these applications as more of a preventative measure in the hopes that I can solve the flying insect issue where it has turned into an issue and prevent it from ever becoming an issue everywhere else. Or at least that's the hope and the plan. So that's it for our check-in now with these European night crawlers. Doing real nice in here, I gotta say. Castings look good, but I do believe at some point soon we're going to have to start driving these systems towards completion and get them set up with a nice new home somewhere too. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.